Get seated. Is this on? Okay, I'm Devin Pillay. I'm from the Sociology Department, and I'm very privileged to be associated with SWAP, and of course our esteemed comrade Eddie Webster, who's the founder of SWAP, and Carl, the president of my jazz club, who is now currently, the general secretary of my jazz club, who's currently running SWAP, and it's a very exciting, highly stimulating place to be. Yesterday was a very stimulating day, and today promises to be as well. We have 3 speakers. The third one seems to be lost in traffic for the moment, but that's fine, we will start anyway. So the session we're kicking off with today on protest movements on 3 continents, and we have a speaker from Brazil, one from Spain, and the other South African. The first is Rui Braga, who's from the University of Sao Paulo, and is the director of the Center for the Studies of Citizens' Rights in Sao Paulo. We also have the second speaker, Alberto Arribos, who's affiliated to the Intercultural Studies Lab at the University of Granada, Spain. And he's a specialist in issues around collective action in Spain, social movements, etc. And the third speaker is Malose Langa, who's from the Department of Psychology, who's hopefully going to be here in time. He's also a senior researcher at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. So it's now just after 9:15. Each speaker will have 25 minutes, and then we'll have discussion afterwards. So Ray.
Thanks, Devin. Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna skip my thanks and my nice introduction, and in order to save time, let's get down to business, straight to the point. I'm gonna read. Sorry for this. Guy Stanley's new book, A Precariat Charter, keeps us from forgetting that we live under the shadow of the precariat, a group of people who are deprived of all work-related guarantees, subjected to uncertain income, and without a collective identity rooted in the world of labor. Amongst the many merits of his most recent book, Stanley reports the damaging effects suffered by a substantial section of the European trade unions movement. At the root of this decline is labor's submission to a socially irresponsible and environmentally unsustainable mode of development. As we've stated in his previous volume on the precariat, a long time could be spent highlighting the superlative merits of the precariat charter. But by raising provocative and challenging questions, studies of this magnitude also encourage a productive debate. In this spirit, I plan on challenging and extending Stanley's argument in 2 ways. First, I'm going to examine the book from a Southern perspective. The data and examples that Stanley provides pertain largely to changing working class relations in advanced capitalist countries. In contrast, I will focus my attentions on the metamorphosis of the working class in the global south, particularly Brazil and Portugal, during the post-40s era. Second, I will raise questions about the class character of the precariat. Stanley reaffirms in his new book that the precariat is not a part of the working class, a label which he reserves for unionized workers and stable employment. In our opinion, this definition is closer to the concept of salariat created by economists from the French Regulation School, which describes a social norm of consumption found in the Fordist mode of development. The precariat, in fact, constitutes a class transformation, a byproduct of capitalism globalization, and increasing strategies to make working conditions more flexible. Furthermore, due to the hyper-commodification of labor, specific forms of state intervention, particularities with regards to insertion in the international division of labor, and anarchic capital reproduction, precariousness from the point of view of the global south has always been a constitutive part of the working class condition. Under this perspective, the present deepening in job insecurity on a global scale is not a surprise. It is supported by the increase in the exploitation of the workforce and above all, the plundering of social rights. It is a regression in civilizational terms, enhanced by a long period of deceleration in capital accumulation since the 70s. How should we interpret this regression, which leads us to a new relation between youth and the trade unions? To a certain extent, Standing's analysis hits the nail on its head, particularly when it comes to the new arrivals to the labor market, such as interns and telemarketing operators. As he suggests, these young workers have a frustrating occupational trajectory, which pales in comparison to the occupational stability often enjoyed by their parents. But if Standing accurately captures the insecurity of these young workers, his characterization of their relations to trade unions deserves to be problematized. According to his perspectives, young workers in precarious employment are hostile to trade unions due to both their lack of political experience and the precariousness of their labor, which together make it practically impossible to organize at the workplace. This supposition leads him to underestimate the precariat's self-organization capacity and to overshadow the ability of trade unions to adapt to new labor realities. In a precariat charter, Standing suggests that precariat will only be well represented through agencies of social and economic governance. By attempting to inspire action in the precariat through an alternative political agenda to a utilitarian democracy, Standing directs the politics of the precariat towards the reforms of public policies. After all, if the trade unions are condemned to disappear as Standing believes, evidently they are unable to propose solutions capable to strengthening the universalization of social rights and confronting the precarization of labor. But what would happen if precarized young workers view trade unions more positively, not as representing the unobtainable privilege of previous generation, but rather as potentially making it possible to access the social rights denied to their parents? A curious incident took place in 2004 when I first started my field research on São Paulo telemarketing operators. Similarly to Standing, I had doubts about the trade union consciousness of these young workers. As the research evolved, however, I realized that my expectations of workers in the telemarketing sector did not match the reality. To a certain degree, my perception changed together with the metamorphosis suffered by Brazilian call center industry itself. Mergers and acquisitions of companies followed by stringent target rules, routinization of work, managerial despotism, high levels of personal turnover, and low wages. All of these conditions fed into workers' critical orientation towards management. This critical look provides a basis for bringing together the precariat and trade unions. Despite their political inexperience, telemarketing operators distinctly to unions for support with respect to their labor claims. Trade unions have also done a remarkable job of transforming themselves in order to reach out to these groups of precarized workers. How do unions develop strategies to organize these workers and build solidarity for collective action? One of the three biggest unions organizing telemarketing operators in São Paulo City, Sintratel, developed organically from telemarketing workers who sought to challenge the conditions of labor beyond the issue of wages. In 2009, for example, Sintratel's labor dispute involved a transsexual by the name of Luna, who works as a telemarketer. Luna demanded to use the female restroom rather than the male one. However, the call center where Luna works obliged her to use the male restroom because the company still considered Luna a man. Sintratel was victorious in representing Luna in the judicial proceeding against the call center, winning her the right to use the female restroom. This labor dispute, spearheaded by Sintratel and the LGBT community, reached beyond working conditions for the individual employee to address broader issues of human rights and homophobia in the workplace throughout São Paulo City. Hence, Sintratel's success as a labor union is based on highly effective social movement unionism model that works in collaboration with other social movements to build a sense of solidarity among the union, workers, and diverse racial, ethnic, and gay communities throughout metropolitan São Paulo. Building solidarity with the community and other social movements beyond labor union itself deals directly with three very delicate issues in Brazil that are typically avoided by traditional labor unions, but which are fundamental to the development of Sintratel. Unequal treatment of women, racial discrimination against blacks, and homophobia regarding gay, lesbian, bisexual, transsexual, and transgender communities. Sintratel sponsors active engagement with these contentious social issues due to their impact on everyday experience of their rank and file. Worthy of mention is Sintratel's sponsorship and participation in March 1st International Women's Day celebration, the São Paulo Gay Pride Parade, which happens every June, and the Black Consciousness March on 20th of November, declared a municipal holiday in remembrance of Black resistance leader Zumbi dos Palmares. Most recent events include a forum for art expositions, Afro dance presentations, the launching of a documentary titled 400 Years of Popular Native and Black Resistance, as well as the release of the book That End I Live in Carandiru by Nininho de Ubaluay. Sintratel directors are activists in a number of social movements which combines their labor organizing experience with broader social issues. There is no break between the subject of the community and the labor union. Instead, there is a continuous ebb and flow between the union, its workers, and marginalized communities. The success of these efforts can be measured by the recent increase in strikes and work stoppage among telemarketing operators in São Paulo. In 2012 alone, a nationally backed strike brought 280,000 workers to a standstill for 10 days. A considerable percentage of strikers were formed by telemarketing operators. Recent strikes in the call center industry, in fact, are part of a bigger national struggle whose origins point back to 2008. Such process has led us to a significant wave of strikes and protests, with substantial wage increase and workday stoppage, comparable only to the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s. Brazil's strike-oriented initiatives demonstrated a tendency contrary to the global north of a unionism enjoying historical levels of peak activity. Regarding the current national strike cycle, the 70% increase in strikes throughout 2013 as compared to the year before it, alongside with proliferation of walkouts amongst private sector workers, specifically from the service sector, is quite remarkable. As expected, the service industry concentrated the worst paid jobs with lowest qualifications and highest turnover rates. It is therefore reasonable to imagine that strikes increase are directly related to the growth of the precariat dissatisfactions with Brazil's post-Fordist finance-based development model fatigue. Considering the political electoral polarization expressed in 2014, one should not be surprised at all with current levels of dissatisfaction direct at social structures threatening the reproduction of a particular Lulist regulation mode. President Dilma Rousseff's current popularity indicators located at around 14% corroborated towards such hypothesis. Well, let's move on to Portuguese case. Examining the Portuguese case raises similar questions about the supposed political incompatibility between the precariat and the trade union movement, identified by standing. Due to increase in unemployment combined with declining significance of trade unions in collective hiring contracts, the Portuguese trade unions have been suffering a certain level of erosion at their base. Unionization rates have been in decline, but the same cannot be said for the willingness of unions to engage in struggle. Even if between 2002 and 2007 there was a decline in both the number of workers on strike and the average number of lost working days, between 2010 and 2012 the opposite occurred. Numbers of workers on strike increased and the average number of non-worker days returned to levels seen at the beginning of the decade of 2000. What has been the reaction of the precarized young Portuguese workers to the blatant increase in unemployment and underemployment and the traditional union movement response to the deepening of the economic crisis? The success of the Portuguese precariat self-mobilization since the periods of the movement Geração Arrasca, the generation at risk, deserves an answer. While there were important previous initiatives, it is clear that this manifestation was the event that inaugurated a new cycle of resistance. The story is well known, but it is still worth remembering. Inspired by the song Such Power I Am from the rock fado group De Olinda, activists Alexandre Carvalho, Antônio Frazão, João Labrinche, Paula Gil decided to organize for the 12th of March of 2011 an event on Facebook whose manifesto called for unemployed youth, misclassified self-employed, intermittent workers, interns, fellows and worker students to protest in Lisbon demanding better working conditions. The event was a huge success with about 300,000 demonstrators in Lisbon and 80,000 in Porto. Following the steps of this first experience, movements connected to precarious labor, such as the Inflexible Precarious Workers Association, hired and unemployed professors, and the Comunidade Association, a non-profit organization that promotes gender equality and equal opportunities for people at risk of social exclusion, organized a powerful social protest called To Hell with Troika. The two main protests took place on 15 September 2012 and 2nd March 2013, with each bringing together over 1 million people in the country's main cities. As the protest movement became increasingly politicized, it also sought to enlarge its support base predominantly by working towards rapprochement with the trade union movement. A mere 2 weeks after the first protest in 29 September 2012, the Labour Federation, CGTP, began a protest supported by the organizers of the To Hell with Troika movement at Terreiro do Paço in Lisbon. In a speech by CGTP President Armínio Carlos, who had been present on 15 September, a call was given for industrial action on 14 November 2012. Not only did the popular mobilization process initiated in Portugal between 15 September and 14 November 2012 unveil a new political conjuncture, but it has also demonstrated the feasibility of a collaborative approach between trade unions and movements connected to precarious labor. While bearing in mind the relative social demobilization in Portugal after the huge success of the To Hell with Troika movement, from the point of view of both unions and workers in precarious employment, a certain collaborative stance has evolved, albeit slowly. This table shows this convergence between unions and precarious workers. Some of the successful approaches include the creation of the Sindicato Nacional de Call Centers, the National Union of Call Centers, the transforming of an association of cultural workers in precarious jobs into a union, the SENA, Union of Musicians and Performing Arts and Audiovisual Professionals, and the recent victory of the Associação Precários Inflexíveis, Inflexible Precarious Workers Association, done in collaboration with the nurses union affiliated to CGTP in gaining recognition as employees rather than misrepresented as independent contractors for roughly 400 nurses who work as telephone operators of Linha Saúde 24 Health 24 line and need regulated contracts. There are a number of differences between the Brazilian and the Portuguese experience. Gang workers in Brazil, for example, fight to implement social rights, whilst in Portugal they mobilize to retain them whilst defending the social state. In both cases, however, there is a little evidence of hostility towards the democratic regime, let alone towards the trade union movement. In fact, in both cases, it is easier to notice that the precariat recognize trade unions as potential allies in the fight for expansion and defense of the social state. Likewise, the trade union movement identifies the precariat as an indispensable force in strengthening their claims. From the point of view of the Global South, there doesn't appear to be an unsurmountable contradiction between union interests and the needs of the precarized youth. In reality, in both Brazil and Portugal, the future of democratic struggles resides precisely in the convergence of these two sectors. Finally, I would like to present a short critical consideration of Standing's main proposal for transforming the denizens of the precariat into full citizens. This is the proposal for a universal basic income, a sum of money that is paid unconditionally to every citizen belonging to a certain region. In his new book, particularly in the article entitled Move Towards a Universal Basic Income, Standing reiterates the need to replace the union agenda with a new agenda of economic security and social mobility, supported by a broad reform of public policies which would culminate in the universal basic income. I should make it clear from the outset that I am not at all contrary to the implementation of policies that ensures unconditional income. But this kind of agenda, at least in the Brazilian case, does not fully meet the demands raised by the precariat in the recent wave of protests since June 2013. While Standing is identifying the demand for a universal basic income and the politics of precariat, whether the precariat actually do or should adopt such a demand remains an open question. Since February 8, 2004, Brazil agreed through the Bolsa Família program, the BFP, to universalize, starting with the impoverished population, policies of basic income. Many Brazilian scholars have shown with diversified data that Bolsa Família program is largely efficient in helping family out of the extreme poverty. In the last decade, the BFP helped to reduce income inequality, considerably changing the social norm of the consumption of the very poor families. The BFP was also primarily responsible for decreasing the rate of extreme poverty in the country, which dropped from 80% of the Brazilian population in 2001 to only 4% in 2011. Between 2003 and 2013, annual federal spending on the BFP jumped from 7.5 billion to 24 billion reais, focused on 16 million families living in extreme poverty. The benefit extends to up to 70 reais, which means $22 American dollars per family each month, and reaches almost 60 million citizens. Consistent with Standing's proposal, Brazilian law stipulated that BFP benefits should eventually be extended to all Brazilian families, regardless of their level of income. In order to disburse 70 reais to every Brazilian family, it would require 82 billion reais per year. Based on figures from 2012, this would force the government to increase welfare spending from the current 3.1% of the budget to around 10.5%. This is a remarkable increase in social spending. Given that other expenditures in security, health and education, as well as transfers to states and municipalities are defined constitutionally, the government would be obliged to reduce spending of public debt, which currently consumes 44% of the federal budget. Needless to say, this would trigger a first redistributive struggle between social class within Brazilian society. Evidently, I see no problem at all in advancing over the federal expenditure with the interest rates and debt installments. Just contrary, I'm very supportive for this idea. However, there is a relevant question. If the agenda of financial security and social mobility supported by the universal basic income implies engaging society in a struggle against the financial markets, why would the Brazilian precariat mobilize around a very modest amount of 70 reais per family rather than an agenda focused on raising spendings on health, education and urban mobility? Besides, it was precisely around these demands that millions of young workers with precarious employment took the streets in 2013 during the months of June and July. There are no longer great controversies about BFP's effectiveness in getting millions of sub-proletarians out of absolute poverty, raising their conditions to the official status of poverty. But the same cannot be said about the next step, that is, to guarantee minimum conditions of social and occupational progress. Some scholars have argued that the Brazilian government should not increase social spending at the expense of investments in health and education since. This is because BFP will not take the assisted families out of their official condition of poverty on its own. Doing so requires a combination of economic growth and increased spending in education and health. We need not revive here the broad debate taking place in Brazil between those who defend universal policies and those who defend target policies. In terms of public policy, it seems reasonable to argue for an approach that prioritizes targeting within an universalist scheme in a strategy of targeting universalism. This strategy entails the articulation of two strategies for reducing inequality, with BFP focused on reducing extreme poverty and universal policies focused on reducing official poverty. The Brazilian experience confirms that BFP does match the interests of the part of the sub-proletariat that is victimized by extreme poverty. However, the same cannot be said about the young urban workers in precarious jobs, subjected to terrible working conditions, intermittent employment, and the harsh reality of low salaries. For these workers, universal spending on health, education, and urban mobility are a large priority, as they consolidated rights and strengthen the articulation between rising qualifications and increasing social protection. Study moves too quickly over the question of whether the European precariat really wants to embrace the universal basic income as a flag of mobilization, rather than preserving the social rights to which their parents had access. This assumption obscures a more totalizing view of the forms of political representativity associated with the precariat's interests, specifically in relation to the trade union movement. In short, study considers that in the current conditions marked by capital globalization and the weakening of unions and traditional social democratic parties, it is only as part of the governance of social and economic agencies that the precariat could be well represented. For this purpose, he argues that the spheres of formulation of public policies should be democratized through the presence of representatives from this new class, the precariat. Of course, we are not against democratization of status apparatus. However, considering the recent Brazilian experience, it is clear that there is no truly credible reason for the precariat to defend the universal basic income as its mobilization motto. In fact, one of the main lessons of the so-called June Days, Jornadas de Junho, was that self-mobilization in defense of citizenship rights continues the defining horizon of political intervention of young workers with precarious jobs throughout the country. By trying his new book to inspire action in the precariat through a political agenda alternative to utilitarian democracy, Stanley has decided to confine the political practice of the precariat to the field of reform of public policies, clearly putting pressure on authorities toward initiatives more in tune with their interests seems necessary for the political education of the precariat. However, if we wish to understand the concrete diversity of its contemporary forms of self-organization, whether in Brazil or in Portugal, limiting the collective action of this group to such pressure seems somewhat insufficient. Thanks.